If you're anything like me, the moment you send off a document or a set of whatever it is you've been working on to a client, you immediately start thinking about the things you didn't do. So it's why I've started using something I call the final checklist, which is basically just me standing in front of a whiteboard before I send something off, where I write out all of the questions that I might have about whether or not something has been included in the package that I'm sending. When we're talking about brand identity assets, that could mean any number of things. So here are a few things that you should check off your checklist before you deliver your final assets. First and foremost, did you include the documentation that you created? That means the color guide, typography guide, and the logo style guide. Did you include vector copies of the logo that you created? That means both in Illustrator, .ai, and .eps, and possibly .pdf format. You want to make sure that you're including multiple versions of the file so that even people with older versions of Illustrator or people with only Acrobat or whatever the case may be can get access to the files and use them in whatever manner they need to use them. Did you also include raster copies of the logo for the web? This means that you've gone in and you've meticulously made sure that every detail of that logo looks great inside that JPEG or looks sharp inside that PNG. You deliver these so they don't have to. That way they can just put these up on their website, give them to their web designer or whomever is working on the website or whatever other web property they're sending to, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, and their logo is going to look good and consistent across all of the platforms because you took the time to include those types of things in the asset package. Also, did you include the native files for any print collateral that you may have designed? So that means native InDesign files for your brochures, Illustrator files for your business cards, or Photoshop files for any type of brochure cover. It doesn't matter what the file is, just make sure that you've included the native version. That's not to say that these people will need the native version of the file, but it will help later on if and when they need to make a change to any of the designs that you've created. I also ask whether or not you've included any special instructions for the printer. This can be especially helpful if there are spot colors or varnishes or anything special that's going into the print of a business card, a brochure, or letterhead, or anything like that. If you have any special requests for the printer, make sure you include some form of a text document, and that should be in .txt or .doc for Microsoft Word format, making it easy for anyone on any operating system just to open it up and take a look at any instructions you have for them. You also need to make sure that you've included the fonts and or font licensing information inside of the assets that you're delivering. If the company owns a license to the font that you've used in your designs already, just simply go ahead and give them a copy of the font, but you need to know that ahead of time. If they do not own the typeface that you have put into the design, then what you need to do is you need to go online and you need to find the information on what they need to do in order to obtain a license, which is basically they need to go pay for it. So you need to give them detailed pricing information on what they need to do in order to get not just the desktop version, but also the web version of the type as well. Because fonts now are on the web and on the desktop. So we need to make it as easy as possible for people to get both of those types of fonts. Now you may be hooked into the Creative Cloud ecosystem, which is great because you have access to something called Typekit. As long as the client or person you're working with has access to Typekit, they too can sync the same fonts you did using the Creative Cloud system. But in any case, you have to make sure that the person you're sending all of these assets to has the font available to them, or at least has a way to obtain the font legally. That's the key word, legally. Also, have you included editable PSD files for any web mockups or user interface elements that you may have designed? This is sometimes outside the scope of a brand identity project, but as designers are asked to do more things nowadays, it's really not that far-fetched that somebody might ask you to do their logo, business card, and do a website while you're at it. So, if you have been tasked with something like this, make sure that you've included an editable PSD file so that the person, when they receive it, can pass it directly over to a web developer, and that web developer can take that mockup and translate it easier into CSS code versus just handling a JPEG. If you need more information on how to send a quote-unquote developer-friendly file, you might want to check out my Photoshop for Web Design series here at lynda.com. Also, make sure you've included any linked photos or graphics. If you're using the packaging feature inside of InDesign or Illustrator, it should automatically pick up any linked graphics or photos. If you're not using that method, though, make sure that any photos you've used in brochures, any raster-based images that you've included, or even icons and graphics and things like that, make sure they're all included in the final package that you hand off. That way, there will be no problems when whatever it is goes to print. Finally, just a word of caution here. Always remember that when it comes to deliverables, less is never more. Make sure you've included even more probably than the client asked for, just to make sure you've covered all your bases. That's not to say that you should give away anything for free. You just want to make sure that you're covering them as far back and as far forward as you need to be. So that means including the latest and greatest versions of files, older versions of files, raster, vector, native, PDF, all of that stuff. That just makes it so that they have different versions of every file and they can make an easy transition from designer to designer or printer to printer. You want to make this as frictionless as possible for them. So just remember, by providing less, you're never providing more.